welcome to an Everyday Canines video. This is the extreme layering series, and in this episode we're looking at adding motion to your cues and to your layering. So there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about as we're beginning to add motion. We've done a lot of this static, helps the dog take that element out of the movement of the handler. It means they've got one thing to concentrate, and it gives them that idea to listen to the verbal rather than what we're doing. When we start to add in motion, we should expect to start getting mistakes because our dog starts to look at us and go, oh, what are they doing? Now, depending on your stage with your dog, will depend on how many mistakes you get. If you've got a dog that's new to this, it's a young dog, and you've been doing a lot of work just on verbals with you static, then adding in the motion shouldn't be too bad because the dog should be primed to use that verbal cue as their primary source of information of what they've got to do. If you've got an experienced dog, which she was when we started doing this a couple of years ago, and they're used to using your body motion to tell them where to go, then that's going to be harder because the dog may choose to pick your body motion as the overriding cue versus your verbal. This is why we spend a lot of time without our body motion, teaching them the cues and building in that value so that the dog puts the verbal cue at a higher value than our body motion. But it can still be hard if we've had a dog that we've trained to follow our motion a lot, or we've got a dog that does just like to follow our motion. Some dogs really follow the motion of the handler very well. This can get us out of trouble at times, but it can also mean that when we're doing something like this, they want to pull into the handler. The biggest problem you've got when you're doing layering is quite simply that. You're sending the dog, and the dog chooses, instead of listening to the cue, they choose to pull into your body and take what's nearest to you. That's the hard part of layering. That's what makes it difficult and why a lot of people don't choose to do it, because it is a case that the dog has to pick the words over you, and that most dogs really want to use body motion as their cue. They prefer it, it's easier for them to understand. So when we get to this stage, building that confidence in the verbals is not only challenging, but it's very important, and it can be done. Trust me, this dog was a body motion based dog. I was a body motion based handler. She didn't start learning, she had verbal cues, don't get me wrong, I said words, but she didn't really learn and understand them till about 3 years ago, and she's nearly 7, so she'd have been about 4, and we had to work on them really hard. So what she's achieving is phenomenal for a dog that came from that body motion, and equally she has early takeoff syndrome, and so she prefers to use my body language if she can, because that helps her to negotiate jumps. So, you know, if she can do this, I would say any dog can do this if you've got the patience and the determination to teach this. Okay, so next thing I want to talk to you about is the timeliness of your cues. It's very important when you're using verbal cues to make sure that you get them out of your mouth in time. What I see a lot of people do when they're distance handlers and they're using verbal cues is they're late with the cues, the dog goes wrong, and then they blame the dog. But it's not that. Bear in mind that a dog, it can't change its mind where it's going when it gets to a certain point. If your dog is running to this jump and it's meant to be going to the tunnel, there's a point of no return where no matter what you say, your dog is likely to want to go in that direction. If they're here and you're saying tunnel and they've already started to take off, they can't do anything about it. Equally, if we've got driven dogs, and we want our dogs to be driven, we don't want them to be going slow around a course and hesitating, that means they are actively picking the next obstacle along as they go, and they're picking it early to ensure they can be driven. So you imagine if the dog came over here and it wasn't picking the next obstacle, it would come over here and it would stop, wait for the cue, then go somewhere. That's not what dogs do. It's what we don't want them to do that, because obviously it wastes time. And so when we've got a drivey dog, they're picking where they're going next, way back here. I would argue that as that dog is landing here, it's already got an idea in its head where it's going. This is where it's important to get those cues in there. This is where the out cue comes useful. So say Sparrow's landed here, her eyes are on that tunnel, and you know, she's going to pick that tunnel if I say nothing. So that's where giving her the out cue causes her to think where she's going and then pick that jump and know that she's not doing that tunnel, she's got to move out. I've got video actually where you can see her and she's focused on that line. You can see she's going to that tunnel and I say out and she goes, oh, going this way. And so you can see that understanding. But again, it comes down to timeliness of cues. The more timely we are, then the better we can set the dog up for success. There's no point giving the dog a cue when it's already taking a jump, unless you're cueing the next obstacle, of course. I always try and avoid cueing on an obstacle when it's a jump, not so much other obstacles, but certainly a jump, because that tends to be a pole knocker situation. If your dog gets here and as they're going over, you say something to them, that tends to be when the pole goes down, because they just lose a little bit of concentration. They're listening to you and then the feet go wrong. I mean, it depends. Some dogs aren't pole knockers full stop, but certainly with her, if I say too much on a jump, that pole comes clattering down because she's listening. And she's also thinking, have I done something wrong? Should I have done something different on this jump? So the moment you want to be cueing your next obstacle is as your dog is landing. Potentially you can do it before. So say for instance, there was a dog walk there. I could potentially say, go dog walk before she's even taken this jump, because I know there's an obstacle there for her to take. But when it comes to two jumps, say I've got this jump where I want her to go over and then I've got a turn, I couldn't do that. If I said go and then loop loop to turn, then she would go, well, yep, and she'd loop here. So that's when I need to cue her as she jumps and lands. So that's something to think about. I recommend videoing your work as you're practicing, video training, and look back on it and look at your timeliness of your cues. If you're making mistakes and your dog's making errors a lot, look at when you cued them and see if that was the reason they were making mistakes. You can usually see I cued that really late, the dog already had decided where it was going. And at that point, there's a point of no return, the dog is going to go where it wants. Another thing to think about is our body motion as we're doing this. We've done a lot of these exercises static without any body cues. But of course, once you're on a course, most of us will be giving body cues. Obviously, you may be a handler who, for whatever reason, isn't going to give body cues. That's fine. But if you are going to give body cues, you need to be thinking about what you're going to do. So when I'm cueing the lines here, when my dog is nearer to me, my arm's going to be lower. As my dog needs to go progressively out from me, my arm is going to get higher, higher to send. And there will be points where I'll be leaning over like this, even though I'm over here, to indicate that jump. We need to make sure that our shoulders and arms are telling the dog where to go at any given time, though of course when we do have verbal cues, potentially our body could be doing something random and the dog could still do it. Okay, so let's start looking at adding in some motion to this sequence and see where we go. So here is our sequence that we set up, 4 jumps and a tunnel. It's reversible, so you can work dog on left, dog on right, and it's important to work both sides. You will find that one side is usually weaker than the other. When I do this, I'm going to be working Sparrow on my right, and for some reason, even though I'm right-handed, that tends to be my worst side. I think it's because I like to throw the toy right-handed, so I prefer to work on the left and be able to throw in the toy. The sequence is set up 5 meters between each jump. So we can do several things on this course, and we're now going to look at that and then add in our motion and our layering. So this is going to be the big test for our dogs. So when you're doing this, think about where you're setting up your dog. If we're doing this straight line, we wouldn't set the dog up facing those obstacles. That's unfair. So we'll set the dog up at this stage. Easier said than done with Sparrow. Wait. To be looking down this line of jumps. And now I'm going to come down this line of jumps. Arm is slightly lower because I don't want to send out there. Go, go, go. Good girl. And so she took that line, no issue. She didn't pick the other obstacles. Good girl. Now at this stage, we are starting to get to a point where we're going to be adding in layering, but initially, we just want to see what happens with our dog as we add in motion. So we're going to take it steady. Because this can be the point when things go wrong. So in this time, I want her to go to that tunnel. I'm going to start here so she's got a choice, and I'm going to move, but I'm not going to go too fast. Go, tunnel, tunnel, tunnel. Good girl. Good girl. If she's an experienced dog, that was no issue for her. So let's see what happens if I move a bit more, because my movement may start pulling her away from the tunnel. So that time I did it at a fast walk, but I wasn't getting to a point where I was layering anything. Okay. Helps if you stand back as well. Go tunnel, tunnel, tunnel. That time I was running, and you can see she still picked up that line fine, even though I was running towards the jump. Now what happens if you have problems? What happens if you start to run and your dog goes, oh, you're going that way, I better go to that jump? You take it back. You take your motion to slower. You're still in motion, but it's a fast walk rather than a run. And you work from there, and then you work up. Okay, so this time I want to send her out. Now, I'm going to be pointing her towards that jump to help. And you say, well, would it make it more challenging to send her pointer that way? Yes, it would. But think about this on a course. If I was coming at this as a course, I would be asking my dog to point out that way from here. I wouldn't be asking my dog to come here and then point out. So, in fairness to her, it makes logical sense for that tunnel, that jump, for her to be set up at an angle. Okay, Spare. This is where we find out if our out cue works on a sequence. So it's going to be go, out, jump. And I'll make sure I put my body in there. Okay. Go, out, jump. Yes, good girl. So see how important that out cue was to take her away from that tunnel. So as I said, she's not made any mistakes. If she was making mistakes, then we'd go back a stage. So this time I'm going to run and get to do the tunnel, and I'm going to be running parallel to it, but I'm not actually going to start layering just yet. Go tunnel, tunnel, tunnel. Good girl. But I was moving parallel. So you can see how we're building in that motion, but you're still taking the obstacle I tell you, and how important that is. In the next episode, we add in the layering, and this is where it gets interesting. I hope you've enjoyed this Everyday Canines video. If you have, you might like to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can check us out on Facebook and Instagram. And I hope to see you all again very, very soon.